Yeah, so the mainstream media, they're just obstinately determined to continue on with their misrepresentations. Case in point, we had this huge story come out recently about Taylor Swift and Blake Lively. And as many of you know, Justin Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, withdrew the subpoena against Taylor Swift because, hello, he received the information that he had been seeking. In other words, Taylor Swift's camp decided to work with Brian Friedman, with Justin Baldoni's camp. Okay. So Taylor Swift has effectively, and I said this the other day, effectively defected. And the media are obstinately, like a bunch of losers, are obstinately insisting on misrepresenting the story to try to fool most people who aren't following this thing closely into thinking that this was a win for Blake Lively's side, and this is somehow a repudiation of Brian Friedman and his style of lawyering. Oh, he realized he went too far, right? But I just think that people can see through this now. They've been there. People are more and more people are able to see through these misrepresentations. But let me tell you what I'm talking about. I went to Variety. First of all, I Googled this story, Blake Lively, Taylor Swift. And then and then I looked at the top news stories that were listed on a Google search. And you just go down the list, tick, 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 Variety and Deadline, et cetera, et cetera. And almost all of them are trying to frame this narrative as some kind of loss for Brian Friedman and Justin Baldoni, as some kind of chastisement of them, in that they had to withdraw their subpoena because they realized they had gone too far, just like Blake Lively's been saying to you, just like Blake's been telling you. You know, you would think that the mainstream media, now that they have been so thoroughly embarrassed by their flagship enterprise, that is the New York Times, right? I mean, the most well-respected, traditionally well-respected, prestigious journalistic outlet in the world. You could argue throughout history, even the New York Times. And yes, I know they've completely lost their luster, and it's been happening for a while. But you have this, the pinnacle of modern journalism, so to speak, proven to have been in bed with Blake Lively and to have colluded with her and assisted her in defaming and trying to destroy an innocent man and an entire movie studio. You would think that after the mainstream media's crown jewel, the New York Times, was caught doing that kind of shit, exposed for doing that kind of shit, you'd think that maybe the mainstream media would learn a little bit of humility and would not continue to collude with Blake Lively and push these misrepresentations on us, these BS narratives. You would think, but you would be wrong. And so, yes, they're trying to push this idea. I looked, for instance, at the Variety article. You read all the way through the Variety article, and you have to go all the way to the end for any intimation that maybe Taylor Swift's camp was now working with Justin Baldoni's camp, that maybe Brian Friedman, as he said, had withdrawn the subpoena because they had received voluntarily, now cooperatively, what they were seeking from Taylor Swift's lawyers. You have to go all the way to the end of that Variety article to see some hint of that. Meanwhile, from the beginning, the article is parroting Team Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds lines on all of this, saying that, oh, exactly, they withdrew their subpoena because they see that they've gone too far. Yeah, this was all a PR stunt. There was no real relevance, no real meaning, no real necessity for this, right? They've abused the system, blah, 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 blah. So again, they're just going to keep trying. And here's the thing, Justin Baldoni's supporters, this is something that I've learned over the years. I've been doing this stuff for years now, over 4 years. And what I've learned with Metoo hoaxes, whether we're talking about Blake Lively's Metoo hoax on Baldoni, or we're talking about Amber Heard's on Johnny Depp's, or yes, Evan Rachel Wood's on Marilyn Manson. When you look at these, okay, you have to accept that you cannot ever depend on the mainstream media and mainstream media outlets to get it right. You just cannot. You just cannot. There have been so many times with these different cases where I've said, "Oh my gosh, they're gonna have to report this." Huge development. I mean, with the Marilyn Manson case, when one of his primary accusers, someone who had been on the cover of People magazine and had gone on The View and had given a disastrous interview there, and I know, but she turns and in a legal declaration, a legally binding under penalty of perjury declaration, she says to the court, "This was a hoax. I was persuaded to make shit up, and I'm sorry about it." She says this, and you get a little bit of reporting by the mainstream media, but this sort of like almost like apologetic, like feeling bad that they had to report it and trying in every way through the wording and the presentation to debunk this thing that they have to report when it was a huge, huge development. So, when things like that would happen, or with the Amber Heard Johnny Depp thing, you'd have these huge revelations come out about the extent of Amber Heard's scheming, or you had those audios came out. I mean, I thought when these things happen that the mainstream media, they would have to acknowledge them. They would have to say, "Oh my gosh, this is what's going on here." And also have to acknowledge this much more widespread phenomenon of Metoo hoaxes, which are just everywhere. But no, they're not going to acknowledge it. And it's crazy to think of this, but the mainstream media watched that whole trial that we watched between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, and they came to the conclusion and then promoted the conclusion that he was the guilty party. So it is a kind of a willful blindness, an obstinacy, a self-delusion. I don't know what you want to call it. And it just keeps happening with case after case after case. And it's going to continue to happen with this Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni saga. It is. So just understand, we're looking at a year of this, y'all, or maybe a little less, until we get to trial next spring. And then you'll see it's going to be the same BS, which is why it's so important to have all of us out here calling BS when we see it and trying to fight for, discover, explore, promote the truth, right? So anyway, interesting stuff, interesting developments. Check out my work. If you don't know who I am, I've been on this case forever. I look at other stories. I get into other things too. It's not all just about me too, but I have covered this case and others a lot, so check out my work. My links are below. As always, tips appreciated, and y'all have a good time. I will be back later.